Hey guys, it's JC here, the gospel-centered health coach. I'm in my bedroom, kind of hiding out. My house is crazy today, but I've been dying to record part 5 of my sugar addiction series because this one that we're going to talk about today was a big one for me, a big corner to turn. We're going to talk about the consequences of indulgence, and I know that may sound weird, but I'll explain. It starts off with this little tiny book right here. It's by author BARB RAVELING. She's the one that introduced this idea to me. And she goes through, it's called I Deserve a Donut. She goes through, let me get the rest of the title, and other lies that make you eat. So she goes through different types of thinking that fuel our emotional eating. One is reward eating, like I deserve a reward after everything I've been through, and we tell ourselves that, and it sends us to the sugar. Or Last Supper eating. I'm going to be so good tomorrow and so awesome on my diet. I better eat everything tonight. You've done that, I'm sure. I mean, we've all done that. Hopeless eating. Like, I don't care anymore. Nothing I try works. I'm giving up. I'm just going to eat whenever I want. She just introduces little ideas like that. But the one that got me was what she calls indulgent eating. Indulgent eating. And it's the idea of just telling ourselves, I want it and I'm going to have it. I don't care about the consequences. I just want to have it. And so I'm going to indulge. Now, I did that all the time with chocolate. I didn't say those words with that attitude, but I kind of added that flavor just to kind of show myself what I was doing. I was acting like that. I might not have said the words, but I'm like, I want it. I made excuses for it. I didn't even feel guilty. A lot of the time, it's like, I just have a sweet tooth. This is my thing. Chocolate is my happy place. I celebrated it. I gave myself full green light to indulge. Like, I was just indulgent. But when she called it that, I was like, oh, that doesn't sound quite as good. Like, I want it. I don't care about the consequences. I just want to have it. And so I started thinking about that in my life. And a lot of times I said, listen, I just have no self-control around sugar. This is the thing. This is where I'm stuck. It is what it is. But it struck me that I had all kinds of other areas in my life where I was completely able to exercise great self-control and not slip up ever. I didn't indulge at all in these areas, and it wasn't even hard. For instance, this is a dumb example, but go with me. You look at someone that's married and in a happy marriage, you don't go to your spouse and say, listen, I just want to date other people. I just want it, so I'm going to do it. I don't care about the consequences. This is just what I'm going to do. You don't indulge that. We know there's boundaries in marriage if we want to keep that healthy relationship strong. So we don't indulge. Like, no, there's not even a toe over the line. If I want my husband's trust, I'm not going to go date other men. Like, duh, right? Or the way we drive. I don't just go out on the freeway and say, listen, I want to drive 100. Well, maybe some of us do. I want to drive 100. I don't care. People are just going to have to deal with the consequences. I want it, so I'm going to do it. I'm just going to drive how I want. I don't know. Maybe that's not a good example, but you see what I'm saying? I don't really do that with heroin. I want it. I'm going to indulge it. I don't care about the consequences. Do you see how many other areas I want to steal something? I want to walk into Walmart and I want it, so I'm taking it. I'm taking this to the extreme, but can you see how it's kind of the same principle? There's other areas where I show great self-control, but in food, why was I stuck in this pattern of indulgence? Just giving myself full reign and not reining myself in at all and telling myself, well, I don't have self-control, but I showed great self-control in other areas of my life. What was the difference? I even thought about if one of my kids walked in with that attitude about something. If they had come in the house and been like, Mom, I want to do it. I don't care what anybody else thinks. I'm indulging. Like, if they had manifested that attitude as a kid, we would have had words. We would have had talk. Because looking at the attitude from that lens, it didn't look quite so healthy. It sounded more mature and selfish. When I applied it to food, the way I was acting with food, that's what I was doing. So what I began thinking about was, I really think the difference, and maybe you've already been processing this as I've been talking, I think when there's serious consequences involved, we restrain ourselves. We exercise great control because we don't want the consequences. I didn't want the consequences of that having an affair would bring. I love my husband. I want to keep him. I don't want the consequences of heroin use. I don't want the consequences of theft. I don't want the consequences of driving $100 or 100 miles per hour down the freeway and what that would bring and slam me in jail or whatever. So I'm very quick to exercise self-control when the consequences are such that I realize it would be a high price to pay. But what I think was happening with food and sugar especially is I didn't think the consequences were that big of a deal. So I gained some weight. Big whoop, like, okay, no, I love it too much and there's too many benefits. And I was not looking eyes open at the consequences I was choosing by my indulgence. I've talked in other videos, but let's list some of these things. The biggest one for me was depression and anxiety. Did not understand that when I put that in my mouth, I was choosing to give myself depression. For me, they were linked. When I gave up the sugar, the depression was gone. I'd fought it for 3-4 years. It was brutal. That was the cost of my indulgence. There is a huge link. And again, you can check some of my other videos. The physical part 2 of this series talks about that. Irritability, mood swings, restlessness, all because my blood sugar was so erratic. I was eating so many white carbs and sugar. My blood sugar was wrecked. And so my moods went with your blood sugar affects your moods. And all my irritability as a mom and with my kids and my mood swings that I thought were hormones, I was paying a high price for my indulgence. It can affect your immune system. It can affect your hormones. It can cause inflammation in the body, joint pain, stiffness, diabetes, heart disease, mental fog. I mean, there's huge consequences that we're not looking at eyes wide open when we make the choice to indulge. Some other addictions, we see very clearly what those consequences are. And so we set those boundaries for ourselves and we exercise that self-control because we're afraid of the consequences. We don't want to pay the price. But with sugar, I think so many of us, me especially, I was in denial. I didn't understand how deeply it was affecting me. And I was giving myself full rein and indulging my every whim for chocolate. A very immature, I mean, I showed I was capable of control when I wanted to, but in this one, I had just told myself I didn't need to. The biggest one for me though, and maybe some of those you've heard, your doctor gave you your numbers, you see the physical effects that are happening from your indulgence in sugar. The biggest one that I did not see was its effect on me spiritually. You would never think sugar has anything to do with your connection with God. Like what does that even matter, right? That doesn't affect it. I can read my Bible, I can go to church, I can do, pray, all those things. And I still was doing those things. But when I cleaned up my diet and took all the processed food and sugar out, I couldn't believe the difference spiritually, the clarity and the emotional stability, getting all that craziness out of my system and calming my system down. There was just a light that turned on inside of me. I just could sense heaven in a very, very different way. I was blown away. Yes, emotional changes. Yes, physical changes, but the spiritual were so radical. I had no idea that it could affect my inner man. It made me think of a story in Daniel chapter 1. We all know Daniel's stories. Daniel in the lion's den and the fiery furnace with his friends went through in Daniel 3. But Daniel 1, I think those of us in food addiction sometimes forget about this story and what he taught us. When he was brought into Babylon, they picked the young and the strong and the beautiful to come into the palace and be trained for leadership and service to the king. And so they were assigned the king's diet, the king's fare that everyone got in the palace. And Daniel was not comfortable with this, the rich wine and rich food and meat. And he begged them. He said, please don't let me defile myself like this. And the eunuch that was over him said, no, I'm going to get in trouble because you're not going to be healthy. We want to fatten you up. But he said, please just test me 10 days. Give me pulse and water, it says in the King James, in Daniel chapter 1. And which pulse is just a word for things grown from the ground, whole food that we've been talking about in so many other videos. Just let me eat whole, real food and water. None of the wine, none of the rich. And then test and see where I'm at. And I love how it says at the end of 10 days in verse 15, their countenances appeared fairer and fatter in flesh than all the children, which did eat the portion of the king's meat. And then in 17, as for these 4 children, Daniel and his friends, God gave them knowledge and skill in all learning and wisdom. And Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. And then over in 20, in all matters of wisdom and understanding, the king inquired of them. He found them 10 times better, 10 times better than his other palace experts. There is a spiritual connection. I'm a gospel-centered health coach. I think that's the one thing that's not being said. There's a lot of websites you can come and read on the physical effects of sugar and depression and all of that, emotional effects, mental effects. But I'm a witness that God knew it was getting in the way of my relationship with him. It wasn't just causing me weight gain. It wasn't just causing me all those other things we talked about, and it was. But my indulgence, my inability to set a boundary like Daniel, my inability to control myself in this area because I was so blind to the consequences and so deeply in denial, it cost me. It was a very high price. And part of that was my spiritual life. As hard as that is to look at. So you can join me for other videos. We'll talk deeper about this, but I just had to get that out there in my sugar addiction series because I think it's kind of the missing piece sometimes in like turning that switch where we go, oh man, like I've got to see this differently. My indulgence in this area is costing me, and it's costing a lot. If the Lord has been calling you, prompting you that this is something you need to look at, stay with me in this series. Keep checking the links below as I add more videos. I'll make sure they're all linked together so you can join me as we continue to discuss this hard transition. But with Christ, all things are possible. He can strengthen us and heal our bodies and help us overcome this addiction in a way that really will set us free. Thanks for joining me today. Hope you have a good week.